Hey everybody, it's Brittany. As you've probably seen in previous videos, I like to start a lot of my plants indoors. This is because living in Eastern Ontario, we have a very short growing season from about the end of May to the end of September, early October if we're lucky. That isn't enough time for a lot of plants to reach full maturity and start producing fruit. That's why certain plants get started sometimes 3 weeks ahead of the last frost, sometimes 6 or 7. The earliest plants that I plant are tomato plants and some pepper plants, and those go in at 8 weeks before last frost. In our region, the date of last frost is May 23rd, May 24th. While starting plants inside is a very good option for a lot of gardeners, there are some challenges that come with it. You might remember in my introductory video, I mentioned that I had spotted some mold or fungus on my indoor plants. I consulted a local master gardener. What I had seen is a very common problem when starting plants inside, and it's called damping off. Damping off consists of several types of fungus or mold finding their way into your seedling pots and growing in certain conditions. Sometimes you can have those conditions and sometimes you don't. First off, how did this happen? A big one is contaminated pots, contaminated soil, contaminated tools. If you recall, I mentioned in an earlier video using seed starting mix instead of regular soil. That is because regular soil contains lots of microorganisms that will be able to prey on your young defenseless seedlings before they even have a chance to develop any kind of protection against them. Seed starting mix is actually sterile. It is supposed to reduce the possibility of any fungi or molds preying on your plants. In addition to using seed starting mix, what you should really be doing is also sterilizing any pots, any tools that you may be using when planting your seeds. That's something that I think I have been a little lackadaisical with. Definitely next year I will be making sure that I always do that. The second way that these spores can find their way onto your plants is just air. Those are the two ways that fungi and mold can make their way onto your plants. Even if spores find their way onto your plants, that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll grow into fungus or mold. They need the right conditions to do that. So what are those right conditions? Moisture. If your plants are overwatered, that creates a very moist environment which fungi and mold really like. That's a big one. Another one is poor air circulation. Having a stagnant environment is going to really promote growth of mold and fungus. The third condition that fungus and mold really thrive in are conditions where the plants are very close together. This also influences the air movement part I was talking about. If the seedlings are very close together, it'll be harder for there to be a lot of air moving amongst the plants. So what are some ways that we can prevent the thriving of the fungus and mold spores on our delicate seedlings? As I previously mentioned, we can do our best to sterilize any pots, any tools that we are using when planting our seeds. That will go a long way in preventing mold and fungus from even starting up. For good air circulation, you want to place your seedlings with a little bit of distance in between them. This can be difficult if, like me, you're trying to start a lot of seedlings on limited space, but it will be better for the growth of your seedlings in the long run, since mold and fungus, if they don't outright kill your seedlings, will really stunt their growth. Another thing for improved air circulation is to have an oscillating fan. You don't need it to be very high, so if you have a fan that has a very light setting, that's probably preferable. That will do a good job in providing that air circulation that you really want in order to keep fungus and mold from thriving in your seedling pots. In terms of overwatering, I know that this can be a very difficult thing to combat, as water is obviously very important for your seedlings to germinate and grow, and most seed packets will advise you to keep the soil moist. So in order to keep your seedlings from getting too moist, which is when fungus and mold will start to grow, you really want to pay close attention. If the sides of your pots are moist, for instance, if you're using cow pots like I do, or peat pots, then you really want to feel the sides of them to make sure that they're not drenched. If the sides of your pots are wet, then the soil inside is definitely moist. That means that you don't need to water again. Which brings me to my last bit of advice on that. Water from the bottom. What does that mean? You might think, oh, it's a potted plant, you pour the water on the top of the soil. This technique makes overwatering very easy, since you're kind of forcing the pot and soil mix to have the water. The solution here is to water from the bottom. You put your pots into a larger bin, possibly a pan, and you pour water in the bottom of that bin. This allows the seedlings or the soil to absorb water as it needs. If you were to examine that plant, you would notice that the part of the stem that is a centimeter or so under the soil is actually a lot thinner than the rest of the stem. This is because the mold and fungus that are under the top of the soil are nourished by strangling the life out of your plant, basically. Because that stem is essentially being strangled, it's not able to take in the proper nutrients up to the leaves, and will end up dying. Say you're able to catch these signs of having fungus and mold, and you want to be able to do something to treat it. What can you do? You could go out and buy a fungicide. Personally, I like to try and use natural approaches. There are a couple great natural fungicides. Chamomile tea is naturally antifungal. So you brew a pot. I tend to do 4 cups of water per tea bag. I'll leave that to cool. Once it has, I'll take it down and water the plants with the chamomile tea just like I would water it with normal water. So maybe half an inch of chamomile tea into the bottom of the bin. So the next couple of times that you would normally water the plants, repeat with the chamomile tea, and eventually you should start to notice a difference. If you aren't, the next thing is to sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon on the soil. This should only be done once, since cinnamon is very strong. The next challenge that I experienced while starting my seeds came a little later in the seedlings, and it was when they started getting quite tall. Depending on what conditions you have, you might achieve either faster or slower rates of growth, and if you achieve faster rates of growth, that may mean that your plant can possibly become root bound. What that means is that the roots have grown so long and have curled around that they've really exhausted the amount of space in the pot that you have given them. If they are in plastic, there is no way that the roots can get out through that plastic, and so it will become root bound, meaning the roots have nowhere else to go. Although this won't necessarily lead to death of the plant, it will certainly stunt its growth. Whenever this happens, once I put in the ground, I could give the roots space, and yet it'll still take a really long time for the plant to start growing again, because it's almost like being root bound has hit pause, and it takes it quite a while to realize that it can now start growing again. Peat moss, although people tend to market peat moss as being a good alternative, saying that, you know, the roots will be able to go through the peat moss, it isn't really the case, because when the peat is pressed into the pots that they make, the fibers are so tightly bound that the roots can't get through. What I've been starting to use now are these things are called cow pots, and these are pots that are made purely out of cow manure that has been processed and pressed down into a pot shape. Because of the composition of the manure, and partly because of processing, the roots are still able to get through. Of course, once they come out of the walls of the pot and are exposed to air, you want to transplant the plant very quickly. Air isn't very good for roots. If you leave it, what will happen is called air pruning. It keeps the roots from continuing. While this isn't necessarily dangerous for the entire plant, it does again stunt the growth. Those white lines are roots that have come through the wall. So that's a surefire sign that my plants need to be transplanted. Now, typically transplanted means that you're taking the plant out of one pot and putting it in another. In this case, because I am using cow pots where the roots can actually go through the walls, I will be simply placing the plant in the cow pot with the cow pot still on it into the bigger pot. This is another reason why it's very important to pay close attention to your seedlings. You really want to be checking them every day, both for watering purposes and for checking to make sure that they haven't outgrown the current pot that they're in. I really hope that you found this useful. I enjoy sharing my tips and tricks with other people, and I would love to hear any feedback that you might have. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. That'll really help me understand what kind of videos you guys are enjoying. I'll see you later. Okay, bye guys.